Coming up on a newscast tonight. President Moon Jae-in and his Vietnamese counterpart adopt a joint declaration following their summit. Part of efforts to build a future-oriented relationship includes boosting bilateral trade. Washington temporarily suspends planned tariffs on Seoul steel exports, but it could be a calculated move as both sides continue talks on possible amendments to their free trade agreement. The reshuffle continues at the White House. A new National Security Advisor is named. Some experts believe the change is made to bring someone who's on the same page with the president on a number of key issues. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Daniel Choi. Let us begin with President Moon Jae-in's trip to Hanoi. The Liberal leader held a bilateral summit with his Vietnamese counterpart there. The duo adopted a joint declaration toward a future-oriented relationship for the two countries. Our Moon Gun-young, traveling with the president, files us this report.
Hanoi. As a capital of Vietnam, the city is in and of itself an epitome of a fascinating blend of the East and the West, combining traditional Sino-Vietnamese motifs with French flair. Largely unscathed by the decades of war, Vietnam's socialist-oriented market economy has become one of the fastest-growing economies in Southeast Asia. And President Moon is looking to raise the trade volume between the two countries to $100 billion by year 2020. Now that would make Vietnam South Korea's second largest trading partner, outstripped only by China. From a wreath-laying ceremony at the mausoleum of Vietnam's late president and revolutionary communist leader Ho Chi Minh to an official welcome ceremony at Vietnam's presidential palace, South Korean President Moon Jae-in took all the steps appropriate for a state visit, rounding up the last 25 years of friendly relations and setting out for a new quarter-century of a shared future. Since diplomatic relations were established in 1992, South Korea has become Vietnam's largest foreign investor and second biggest trading partner. Bilateral trade stood at $61.5 billion last year. Following a one-on-one between the leaders of Seoul and Hanoi, Presidents Moon and Chun Tae-kwang adopted a joint declaration for a future-oriented relationship.
꽝 주석님께서는 2020년까지 현대화된 산업국가를 건설하고자 한다고 말씀하셨습니다. 저는 양국의 긴밀한 상생 협력이 베트남의 산업화 목표와 2020년까지 교역액 1천억 불이라는 공동의 목표 달성에 크게 기여하리라는 점을 강조했습니다.
The two countries agreed to hold annual summits to deepen their trust, foster economic cooperation that's reciprocal and mutually beneficial, make more efforts to strengthen the prosperous people-to-people network, and cooperate in bringing peace on the Korean Peninsula.
Vietnam highly commends South Korea's efforts to push for dialogue with North Korea to restore peace and solve the nuclear problem on the Korean Peninsula through peaceful talks.
The two leaders also witnessed the signing of several agreements promoting trade, transport, labor, and infrastructure cooperation. The underlying purpose of President Moon's Vietnam trip rests on two tenets. One, South Korea is quietly bolstering alliance with like-minded economies in the face of global trade protectionism. And two, perhaps more practically, Vietnam, as one of the closest allies of North Korea, is one that Pyongyang may look to for inspiration. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News, Hanoi.
President Moon took the occasion to touch on a sensitive historic topic, Korea's participation in the Vietnam War more than half a century ago.
우리의 마음에 남아있는 양국 간의 불행한 역사에 대해 유감의 뜻을 표하며 양국이 미래지향적인 협력 정진을 위해 함께 힘을 모아가길 희망합니다.
President Tran responded, saying he thinks highly of South Korea's sincerity towards its history in the Vietnam War, adding he hopes the Seoul government will make additional efforts to heal the wounds of the past, strengthen friendly relations between the two countries, and enhance mutually beneficial cooperation. President Moon was referring to the massacre of civilians by South Korean troops during that war. And following that summit, President Moon attended the South Korea-Vietnam Business Forum to promote economic cooperation between the two sides. But even while his abroad issues back home are still high on the agenda, the Liberal leader also took part in a special event held to help create jobs for young Koreans. Hwang Ho-jun has the full story.
With more than 650 business leaders from both South Korea and Vietnam, it was the biggest bilateral business forum since Seoul and Hanoi established economic relations 25 years ago. President Moon Jae-in attended the South Korea-Vietnam Business Forum on Friday evening alongside his Vietnamese counterpart, President John Dae-kwang. President Moon said Vietnam has become Korea's fourth largest trade partner, resulting in about 5,500 Korean companies doing business in Vietnam and providing quality jobs to local workers. In his address, President Moon outlined the terms of the MOUs that he signed Friday with the Vietnamese government and pledged to continue to promote mutually beneficial two-way trade and cooperation with Hanoi. Also during the forum, he said providing quality jobs for the younger generation is an important task for both countries. And noting that both countries are trying to encourage young entrepreneurs, President Moon pledged to support South Koreans and Vietnamese planning startups together. Earlier in the evening, he stopped by the ASEAN Younger Generation Job Agreement ceremony, an event aimed at encouraging Korean companies in Southeast Asia to provide more job opportunities for young Koreans and young Koreans to expand their horizons. Some 40 Korean business leaders and a group of young adults seeking jobs in ASEAN nations attended the event. President Moon vowed to continue his employment drive and actively help young Koreans land jobs overseas. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Let's turn our attention to another major shakeup at the White House now. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster is replaced by John Bolton, a former ambassador to the UN. This signals a further shift towards hardliners weeks before a U.S.-North Korea summit. Kwon Jang-ho gets us up to speed with the developments.
U.S. President Donald Trump once again announced a major White House reshuffle in a tweet on Thursday. Thanking H.R. McMaster for his service as National Security Advisor, Trump announced he was handing the role to former UN Ambassador John Bolton starting April 9th. The decision was hardly a surprise, as it had been widely known that McMaster did not always see eye to eye with the president. But the timing raises concerns, as the move comes with only 2 months to go until the highly anticipated US-North Korea summit, which McMaster was heavily involved. Now in comes Bolton, who has had several senior positions in Republican administrations since the Ronald Reagan era. But he became a household name during the George W. Bush administration as the UN envoy and a vociferous advocate of the Iraq War. His hawkish views have diminished little, as he has repeatedly expressed skepticism over talks with North Korea in recent weeks. And last month he wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal offering a legal defense for carrying out a preemptive strike on the regime. Bolton, along with former CIA Director Mike Pompeo, who is taking over the post of Secretary of State, has markedly upped the Trump administration's hardline stance, leading to the conclusion that negotiations with Pyongyang are set to become even more difficult than they already were.
Maybe North Korea would expect something from the United States, like guarantee of its security and regime, and softening of its economic sanctions. But I think as John Bolton coming in, I think they would not accept all those kinds of proposals by North Korea.
Despite Bolton's calls for military action, experts widely agree that any strategy using military power is highly unlikely as of now. However, the fact that Trump chose Bolton to such a key post suggests that the potential of military options will likely remain on the president's mind.
Bolton has routinely suggested military options as a standard recourse for American diplomacy. Again, not just with North Korea, right, but with a lot of other places, particularly in the Middle East. The president had to know that John Bolton was a pretty controversial character. John Bolton's been around for 20 years and has been saying these sorts of things for a very long time. Yet the president still chose him anyway, which suggests that, he's at least vaguely listening to his advice.
Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Washington is willing and ready to hold a summit with North Korea in May. Following the announcement, the U.S. State Department spokesperson confirmed preparations are being made for that historic event. Kim Mo-gyun shares with us her remarks.
North Korea is yet to release an official announcement on U.S. President Trump accepting the regime's offer to hold a summit, leading to mounting speculation regarding Pyongyang's plan. Despite the lack of an official response, the U.S. State Department said it is still pushing through with preparations for a possible summit between U.S. President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Washington's conviction that such summit will take place is based on the trust it has on Seoul, according to State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert. She referred to South Korea as the best interlocutor on North Korea issues, stressing that the U.S. trusts its allies and partners. Earlier this month, President Moon Jae-in's chief National Security Advisor Chung Eui-yong delivered North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's message to the White House, which said that the North is committed to denuclearization and is willing to hold talks on the issue with the U.S. president. Meanwhile, regarding President Moon's remarks that a three-way meeting with Pyongyang and Washington could be possible, Nauert said that although there are no such plans currently, the U.S. is in close consultation with South Korea and Japan regarding such possibility. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
The nation's steel exporters can let out a sigh of relief for now. Washington placed a temporary tariff exemption on Korean imports. But according to our Kim Hye-sung, there may be more to the U.S. decision than meets the eye.
South Korea is now exempt from the steel and aluminum tariffs announced by President Donald Trump, at least temporarily. On Thursday, local time, the White House formally authorized a suspension of the tariffs for 6 countries: South Korea, Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, and Mexico, plus the EU. In a statement, the White House said South Korea was listed because of its important security relationship with the U.S., including a shared commitment to eliminating the North Korean nuclear threat. President Trump will decide by May 1st whether to extend those exemptions based on the status of discussions with each country. Trump signed off earlier this month on tariffs of 25% on steel imports and 10% on aluminum, and for countries that don't have exemptions, they take effect this Friday. The White House announcement comes as Seoul and Washington continue talks to possibly amend their free trade agreement, with South Korean officials, including Trade Minister Kim Hyun-jong, lobbying in Washington in recent weeks to win a reprieve from the tariffs. The announcement is a temporary relief for South Korea, third largest steel exporter to the U.S., but experts say it is not necessarily good news.
The move gives Washington more leverage in the ongoing bilateral trade talks with South Korea, like a trade-off to get South Korea to lower its tariff barriers to U.S. automobiles and agricultural products. So South Korea should be careful deciding what it's willing to give or take. At the same time, the U.S. is indirectly pressuring its allies to join in efforts to target Chinese steel and possibly to file a complaint with the WTO together.
South Korea held its third round of trade talks with the U.S. and Washington last week and is in the last stages of negotiations. The Trade Ministry said it will continue to work closely with the Trump administration for a full exemption and ensure Korean companies are not negatively impacted. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
The Donald Trump administration announced a host of new tariffs on goods from China. The decision follows a 7-month investigation into what Washington calls Beijing's theft of intellectual property, an issue that's long stood in the way of the two countries' trade relations. The Asian giant vowed to formulate a resolute response. Park Hee-jun zooms in on what could be a prelude to a trade war.
U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to impose tariffs on up to $60 billion worth of Chinese goods has stoked fears of a trade war between the world's two biggest economies. According to Trump, China is responsible for the loss of thousands of American jobs and a U.S. trade deficit worth hundreds of billions.
But we have a trade deficit, depending on the way you calculate, of $504 billion. Now, some people would say it's really $375 billion. Many different ways of looking at it, but any way you look at it, it is the largest deficit of any country in the history of our world. It's out of control.
But the administration says it's a retaliatory move against what it calls China's use of pressure and intimidation to steal U.S. intellectual property. In addition to the tariffs, the Trump administration also plans to restrict new Chinese investment in America and take action against China at the World Trade Organization for what it calls unfair trade practices. China in response said it's ready to retaliate. The Chinese embassy in Washington vowed to fight to the end in any trade war with the United States. Beijing's Commerce Ministry also announced in a statement that it plans to slap a 15% tariff on 120 categories of American agricultural and steel goods and take legal action against the U.S. at the WTO. The prospect of a global trade war sends stock markets reeling. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell almost 3% after the announcement, and fears were even more evident in Asian markets, where in Hong Kong the Hang Seng fell as much as 3.7% and Japan's Nikkei by about 3.9%. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Senior military officials from South Korea, the U.S. and Japan gathered in Washington this week at the 10th Defense Trilateral Talks. They agreed to reaffirm a joint commitment to regional security. Park Ji-won sheds light on what was discussed.
The 10th annual installment of Defense Trilateral Talks was led by South Korea's Deputy Minister for National Defense Policy, Yeo Seok-ju, U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs, Randall Shriver, and the Japanese Deputy Director General for Defense Policy, Masami Oka. During the working-level consultation, the three countries once again vowed to deepen their security cooperation and jointly respond to common security challenges in the Asia-Pacific region. The officials urged North Korea to abandon its nuclear and ballistic missile programs in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner, and to cease all other provocations. They also agreed to cooperate with the international community on a multilateral level to ensure that the UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea are fully implemented. They agreed to act together to eradicate Pyongyang's illicit maritime activities, such as prohibited ship-to-ship transfers. In addition, the three countries have decided to continue missile warning training and anti-submarine warfare exercises while reiterating the importance of information sharing on the North's nuclear and missile programs. The three countries' defense representatives have also agreed to hold the 11th Defense Trilateral Talks next year in South Korea, with a specific date to be determined later. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Lee Myung-bak is detained on corruption charges after a Seoul court issued an arrest warrant late Thursday night local time. The ex-president was taken from his home to a detention center in the east of the capital. Cha Sang-mi, who's been closely following the developments, fills us in on the latest.
The former president arrived at the Seoul Eastern Detention Center in Songpa-gu District, southeastern Seoul, in the early hours of Friday morning, less than an hour after the Seoul Central District Court issued an arrest warrant against him. Before leaving his home, the former president posted a photograph of a handwritten statement on his Facebook page saying, quote, "I don't blame others. Everything is my fault, and I feel remorse." Lee's legal team expressed regret over the decision and said that this is the start of a long fight, signaling their plan to challenge each of the allegations in court. As for the interrogation, the prosecutors this morning said there will be no questioning today, considering Lee's old age and the busy schedule of his first day of detention, which includes a medical examination, but said they will be visiting the detention center for questioning in the near future. Normally, suspects processed by the Seoul Central District Court are detained at the Seoul Detention Center in Gyeonggi-do Province, but the court decided to hold Lee at the Seoul Eastern Detention Center, considering another former president, Park Geun-hye, is being held at the Seoul Detention Center. Lee is now in solitary confinement on the top floor of the detention center in a cell just 10 square meters big. That sounds small, but it's actually double the size of an average solitary cell and includes a TV set and separate shower facilities. It's been about a year since Lee's successor Park Geun-hye was arrested on March 31st, 2017 on serious corruption charges, including bribery and abuse of power. Her trial is coming to a close and prosecutors are demanding she serve 30 years in jail. With Lee Myung-bak's arrest, he becomes the fourth living former Korean president to have been detained over allegations of past corruption. The 76-year-old faces at least 14 charges, the most serious of which is receiving $10 million in bribes from businesses and agencies. Other charges include embezzlement, tax evasion, and a violation of election law. This also marks the first time in 23 years that two ex-presidents are detained at the same time. Ex-presidents Chun Doo-hwan and Roh Tae-woo were jailed for mutiny and corruption in 1995, but were released 2 years later through a presidential pardon. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Now that the ex-conservative leader is under arrest, the focus shifts to the next stage of the investigation process. Prosecutors will likely visit the detention center for further questioning and continue to expand their probe. For details, let's turn to our Lee Jung-yeon.
Prosecutors can now keep former President Lee Myung-bak detained for up to 20 days before he is formally charged. In principle, they're allowed to request his presence at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's office. But since the former leader refused to show up for his hearing, there's a high chance he could also refuse this request. So for now, it seems most likely that the prosecutors will go to the Seoul Eastern Detention Center sometime early next week. He will most likely be charged early April, so it doesn't overlap with major events such as the Inter-Korean Summit, the U.S.-North Korea Summit, and the local elections, all coming up in the next few months. As for the actual sentencing, legal pundits are foreseeing a very long investigation process, as there are more than 500 people to call as witnesses alone. Realistically, it would be almost impossible to sentence him within 6 months. His family members could also be the subject of investigation, including his wife Kim Yoon-ok, his son Lee Si-young, his son-in-law Lee Sang-ju, as well as his brothers and nephews, who are all linked with auto parts company DAS, the firm at the center of the case. So possibly for the first time ever, a former South Korean president may stand trial along with his family members as well as his close confidants. Lee Jung-yeon, Arirang News.
Moving on to the world of sports now, baseball fans will be looking forward to this weekend as the KBO's brand new season begins. One thing to note, though, the schedule will be a bit different this year with a hiatus in mid-August so the players can take part in the Asian Games. Here's Won Jung-won with a guide to the changes.
Korea's Professional Baseball League was founded in 1982, and since then, baseball has become by far the country's most popular sport, with attendance at over 8 million people in the past 2 seasons. This year, the league is starting the season earlier than ever, this Saturday, March 24th, so that the stars of the Korea Baseball Organization can play in the Asian Games in Indonesia this coming August. Until now, the league's earliest start had been March 27th. Starting sooner has meant less preparation time in spring training, and taking a break mid-season for the Asian Games could make for an unpredictable year. The league's 10 clubs will be trying to find their feet in the new season and with new rosters. But the defending champions, the Kia Tigers, look to be in shape for another good run. They've managed to hold on their championship squad from last year, and they're the only club to bring back all 3 of their foreign players, including Hector Noisy and Pat Dean. The Tigers will begin their title defense by hosting the KT Wiz for 2 games at home in Gwangju, in the nation's southwest. And the Doosan Bears, last year's runners-up, will play the Samsung Lions at home in Jamsil, southern Seoul. The regular season's first games start this Saturday at 2 p.m. Won Jung-won, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need before planning your weekend. Michelle, seems like conditions are finally warming up, but unfortunately that also brought fine dust. I hear it's going to get even worse tomorrow.
Daniel, more smog from China is expected to blanket the peninsula, dragging the air quality to bad levels. Now, the whole nation can expect some high concentration of dust during the weekend. And for the time being, the thick fog is likely to lower the visibility in the morning as well, so pay extra attention on the roads. Now, the nation will kick off Saturday with chilly readings. Seoul starting the day with 4 degrees Celsius. Chuncheon is chillier at 0 degrees, while Busan is warm at 7 degrees Celsius. The whole nation will see a huge jump into the afternoon, Seoul reaching up to 13 degrees, where it's going to be milder everywhere else. Now, by the middle of next week, the mercury will rise even up into the 20s for Seoul under some clear sunny skies. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have in store for you on tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for watching.